friends, it's Jeanna. So excited to be coming to you here in October on the heels of the second and final eclipse of 2024. This episode, we aren't going to get into the specifics really of this year's eclipses. This is more intended to be an overarching overview of what eclipses are, what they do, how do we derive meaning from them within different astrological traditions, and also how do the eclipses show up in the public realm? Right now, so at the end of the episode, I'm going to get a little bit into the Diddy scandal because it is a very big eclipse story of both the spring and fall eclipse cycles of 2024, number one. And number two, because of the way that it's lighting up the charts of so many of the major players, I fully anticipate that the eclipse cycles through 2025, maybe even 2026, are going to continue to bring this story into the news cycle in pretty major ways. So that's a way that we are going to look at eclipses in practice. Like, how are the eclipses really putting the spotlight on certain current events? Before we get into the episode today, I do want to just quickly shout out that last month in my September solo, we talked about Astrology 101. We dug into the meaning of the planets and how those help us figure out what the signs mean. And so if you consider yourself a beginner, or if you just like a refresh on what are the planets, what are the signs, how do we make meaning, check that one out before we dig into eclipses today. So when we talk about eclipses, we are talking about the moon, of course, and specifically, we are talking about the nodes of the moon. And you may hear this if you keep up with astrology, this idea that the eclipses happen on the north node or the south node. And unless you're an astronomy nerd, you might be like, what the fuck are the nodes? I will say, before we super get into that, in the tradition I work in, the nodes are mathematical points. They are not considered planets. They are not considered celestial bodies. They are mathematical points where the orbit of the moon intersects with Earth's ecliptic. Put another way, we're going to go back to high school science class a little bit here, really briefly. The moon has an inclined orbit, and so because of this, an eclipse is only going to occur where the Earth-Sun plane intersects with the moon's orbit on that incline. And I'd super recommend, especially if you're a visual learner, that you take a beat at some point, either throughout listening to this episode or just pause it, pull it up on your phone, do a Google and check out what an eclipse looks like with just an image that comes up on Google search. It will help it visually make a lot more sense to you. So the point that is called the north node is where the moon's orbit is moving up into the northern ecliptic hemisphere. And the south node, makes sense, is where the moon enters the southern ecliptic hemisphere. And that's a really brief technical explanation of what the nodes are. And that is just to say the nodes are where eclipses happen because it's where the sun and earth meet to cast shadows with the moon. And sometimes these look incredibly dramatic visually. Sometimes you can absolutely tell, and it depends on where you live on Earth, how visible or not visible that eclipse will be. But sometimes they are very dramatic, right? It's like everyone gets their eclipse sunglasses, goes outside, looks at what's happening up in the sky. And with solar eclipses, those tend to be the more visually dramatic for those of us here on Earth, because with solar eclipses, the moon blocks the sun. With lunar eclipses, the Earth is blocking the moon. The Earth is between, which is to say, solar eclipses, the moon has moved in between the Earth and the sun. With lunar eclipses, the Earth is in between the sun and the moon. Usually eclipses happen twice a year, roughly 6 months apart, and they come in pairs of 2. So 4 per year is standard, although sometimes there can be up to 5 or 6, depending on where in the sky things are happening. And a solar eclipse, it occurs during a new moon when the sun and moon are in the same sign. A lunar eclipse occurs during a full moon when the sun and moon are in opposite signs. And this is because even though the nodes are mathematical points, those mathematical points are shifting in space along with the Earth and the moon's orbit. And so consequently, they will also always be in opposing zodiacal pairs. Super quick refresh on how the 12 signs of the zodiac are split into 6 pairs of opposing signs. These pairs are Aries and Libra, Taurus and Scorpio, Gemini and Sagittarius, Cancer and Capricorn, Leo and Aquarius, and Virgo and Pisces. And so when a new moon happens in Libra, for example, where the sun and the moon are at the same degree of Libra, then we understand that the full moon of Libra season will happen in Aries because that is the opposing sign. So eclipses come in pairs, and they typically come in pairs of opposing signs. But sometimes, like we have going on right now this year into next year, if the nodes are in a year where they are starting to shift signs, we might get a mixed eclipse season like we just had. In September, we had a full moon lunar eclipse in Pisces during Virgo season on September 17th, 2024. But then we had a new moon solar eclipse in Libra on October 2nd, 2024. When the nodes are close to the end of one sign, lunations that occur really early in the next sign sometimes are then considered partial eclipses. And so right now we are in one of those transitional periods. We're currently wrapping up the Aries Libra cycle, and we're starting the Virgo Pisces one. In 2025, we are going to have a lunar full moon eclipse in Virgo on March 13th, and then we will have a new moon solar eclipse in Aries on March 29th. And that will be the last and final North Node eclipse in Aries for about 18 and a half years. By September 2025, we will be exclusively having eclipses on that Virgo Pisces axis. So that's what the nodes are. That's what eclipses are. But assessing meaning and significance is where things get a little more complicated. At this point, and I am obviously recording this in October of 2024, internet astrology often mishmashes a bunch of different traditions together without delineating where things come from. As an ex-academic, this is one of my major pet peeves about this field. You may have heard the nodes called destiny points or some such. You may also not know why that's the case. And so here we have to take a step back and position ourselves. I've talked about this in previous episodes, but there are so many astrological traditions. The basis of what I largely work in might be called reconstructed neo-Hellenistic or traditional astrology, and I use some techniques from modern as well. And then modern astrology is a contemporary branch of the field developed in the 20th century, which itself has many different branches like evolutionary or psychological, also sometimes called Jungian. There is also Vedic or Jyotish, which comes out of India and is an unbroken tradition that has been continuously practiced in that region for thousands of years. And the reason I bring up Vedic is because in that tradition, they do consider the nodes of the moon, which they call Rahu and Ketu, to be planets. And in that tradition, which also is intersecting, of course, with Hindu as a religion and beliefs around karma and reincarnation, the nodes are major players in understanding a person's destiny or karma. I am not a Jyotish or a Vedic astrologer, and I also do not practice evolutionary astrology, which is evolutionary astrology, my hot take is that it's sort of modern astrology's new age love child, which has borrowed a lot of ideas from the East, like karma, independent of their context. And so in my own personal practice, I do not treat the nodes as indicators of destiny or karma or fate. And I want to be really clear that different practices within different traditions are valid, but should be talked about within the context of that tradition. Saying that the nodes represent destiny or karma without even knowing what Vedic or Jyotish is, that might be a problem, one could say. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's use a critical lens. And so to go to the text, we're going to get a little academic studenty here. In ancient astrology, Demetra George, one of the mothers of the neo-Hellenistic movement, writes that in Hellenistic and medieval astrology, eclipses are simply not vested with the kind of significance that they are in Vedic or in some modern traditions like evolutionary. So she writes, quote, "There is no indication in the Hellenistic texts that they had anything to do with karma, reincarnation, evolution, or past lives. These associations were imported from Vedic astrology during the late 19th century, when there were cross-cultural transmissions of metaphysical doctrines between East and West astrologers, such as Alan Leo, who spent time in India under the influence of the Theosophical Society." End quote. It's also really notable to me that ancient Hellenistic astrologers like Vettius Valens did not uniformly apply good or bad morality to the nodes, which is so common in modern astrology. To them, interpreting the nature of the eclipse event or the natal birth chart was still dependent upon a number of factors, such as the planets that may sit with an eclipse. And so the north or ascending node, which is also called the dragon's head, or I don't speak Latin, Caput Draconis, Latin people, classics people, let me know, get in the comments. So, but which is to say, the North Node is interpreted as having to do with hunger and increase. But the kind of idea that they have in Hellenistic is not that hunger or increase is always a net good. That's very capitalist mythology, right? So, to Hellenistic astrologers, if an eclipse was sitting with or impacting the benefic planets like Venus and Jupiter, then it's like, hey, that's more of a good thing, you know? Like bigger party, increased prosperity, increased beauty, increased pleasure, you know, you love to see it. But if the North Node is sitting with the malefics, Mars and Saturn, then that's an indicator that there may be more or increasing difficulty in a particular circumstance with an eclipse. Like the hunger of the dragon's head is chaotic neutral, to use D&D terms. Like there's not an inherent morality to it. And that's the same thing with the South Node, also called the descending node, also called Cauda Draconis or the dragon's tail. And that's where we are, for lack of a better word, releasing the metaphysical bowel movements of life. Per the medieval Arabic astrologer Abu Mashar, the South Node, when with the malefics, Mars and Saturn, decreases the impact of those difficulties actually. But it is very common to see South Node eclipses derided as being negative because you lose things or you release things. And if Mars or Saturn, which are the malefics across pretty much all traditions, are involved, then it's like, oh, and it's going to be like the Tower card in the tarot, like war and disease and famine falling upon your house. And it's like, actually, the South Node with Mars and Saturn within the tradition I practice is a really helpful thing because it decreases the difficulties and limitations that those planets bring. However, and again, you know, kind of same idea. If the South Node is with the benefics, then Mashar writes that it also lessens the benefits of Venus and Jupiter. Like, if Venus or Jupiter are sitting with the South Node, it's not that those good things aren't going to happen or aren't going to come, but just that the impact will be more subdued. So even within a shared tradition, there can be different ways to interpret the nodes. Like, say that you maybe weren't born at an eclipse, but that you still have your sun or moon conjunct one of the nodes in your birth chart. Valens would say that this invites more instability into a life because that is a phase of transition at the moon's ecliptic where it's changing phases. And so the idea that one of your like really important core planets would be there might introduce or instigate more instability in life. But Ptolemy would say that the same phenomenon indicates versatility in a person, an ability to adapt, a strong motivation toward pursuing one's goals because you have a very deep awareness of like what you're wanting. Different interpretations, same tradition. Demetra George also notes that philosophically speaking, this interpretation of the eclipses in ancient Greece and the medieval Islamicate indicates a worldview in which up or like the direction, you know, up or north is good and down or south is bad. And so like that is also something to be aware of when we are talking about the nodes or any astrology. What does the meaning we are ascribing to them indicate about our own worldview and cosmology? Where are the white supremacist, like enlightenment-centric underpinnings, and so on? Eclipses can be more or less impactful for a person on an individual level, depending on what it's activating in someone's chart. And this is the other thing I tell my students and clients all the time, like not all eclipses are created equal. Different ones will be differently impactful for different people because we are all living and breathing embodiments of our own unique natal chart. So if the eclipses are, for example, landing in an angular house, so like your first house, which is also your rising sign, your fourth house of home and family, your seventh house of partnership, your 10th house of public reputation and career, like if it's landing in one of those really visible spots, then probably like it's gonna be noticeable. The impacts will be noticeable, right? If you're having an eclipse on one of your luminaries, which is to say on your own natal sun or moon, or on like your planetary time lord, like there are ways that it can become a much bigger, more felt, more visibly impactful thing in life. However, I also tell my students and clients, like, if you're doing the work, you're already aware of where life finds you and you're actively engaging in changing circumstances you're displeased with or taking accountability or pursuing what you want. Eclipses are probably more just going to feel like confirmation or like a bad day, a normal bad day, or a nudge in a general direction rather than like getting the rug swept out from under you, you know? Eclipses tend to be more dramatic for folks when they are ignoring an issue or trying to evade consequences for their actions. So, a current example of an industry wide scandal, for lack of a better word, that the eclipses are unraveling that very much has to do with accountability for evading the consequences of their actions is everything to do with Diddy, aka Puff Daddy, aka Sean Combs. As of this recording, he has been accused of sexual abuse by more than 100 people in various lawsuits. He has been charged in the state of New York and has had his appeal for bail denied 3 times. On September 17th, the day of the full moon lunar eclipse in Pisces this year, a federal court in Manhattan unsealed charges against Diddy for racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. And they alleged that he, quote, abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct, end quote. So that full moon Pisces eclipse in September a few weeks ago directly involved Diddy's moon because Diddy has a Virgo moon, which so often speaks to emotions, vulnerabilities, the body, kind of like exposing the underbelly, if you will. And this Libra eclipse we just had on October 2nd also impacted him. He has a Libra Venus and Jupiter conjunction, which is evidence, P.S., of how domiciled planets are not inherently moral, are not inherently like quote unquote good, right? And those have been getting eclipsed by the South Node. Venus can indicate so many things in a chart, which, art, culture, beauty, aesthetic, relationship, love, connection, all the kinds of things that I talk with my clients and students about. But it can also just like very literally indicate how we treat women, how we respect or do not respect femininity in life. And in this particular case, his like uber charismatic Venus Jupiter conjunction is getting run like he's in the trash compactor in Star Wars. It's like, here comes the very long overdue consequence. Try to fight the walls that are closing in. But I looked at the charts of almost 20 figures who have been concretely linked to Diddy, and the number of them currently having their sun, moon, ascendant, midheaven, or personal planet eclipsed is very high. It is so high. And a lot of them have personal planets or points that are not only on the Aries Libra axis, which again, we talked about how those eclipses are currently wrapping up, but are also on the Virgo Pisces axis, which is where we are going to be having eclipses through 2026. So the other person I will talk about at length here is Cassie Ventura, who is Diddy's ex, who was so deeply brave in bringing her abuse forward in the first place. She has a lot of planets being lit up by the eclipses right now, right? She also has a Venus getting South Node eclipse. And this is where the context shows up, right? Like someone's Venus is being eclipsed by the South Node. Venus, love, relationship, women, femininity, art, beauty. And then the South Node, like decreasing, lessening, changing the story around. Like in Diddy's case, we can see pretty readily, even not knowing him personally, that his eclipse is very much about accountability for how he treats women. And in Cassie's case, at least with what is, publicly known, which is all I'm going to speculate on here, we can see her really letting go of old conceptions of self, making public and releasing information about her own abuse, right? This is a Venus in Libra South Node for her that is seeking justice. That's the justice side of Libra coming in, right? And then Cassie's sun is in Virgo, so it will also be getting South Node eclipse to these next few years. Again, South Node eclipses with our sun. Our sun is so much about our personal identity, our sense of self, our core values. And so major changes in store for that probably. Like certainly she's experiencing a shift in public reputation. But her Jupiter is in Pisces. And like I said earlier, when a benefic, and Jupiter is the greater benefic, is with the North Node, that's about an increase of like more good things, like no such thing as too many good things. That's an increase of all Jupiter related things. So I would really expect to see an increase in prosperity, an increase in support, just having that safety net and protective bubble, really securely around her. Other people in the Diddy web whose charts are just so lit up by this eclipse transition include Usher, who has a Libra sun and a Pisces moon, Justin Bieber, who has a Libra moon, a Virgo midheaven, and a Pisces sun and Venus, and his IC is also there. Jay-Z has a Libra moon and Jupiter. Jay-Z is purportedly a Pisces rising, although his birth time does not have a high Rodin rating, so I wouldn't bank on that necessarily. Beyonce, who I feel confident saying we will never have her birth time. She will never give us her birth time. But she has a Libra stellium, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, and that's been getting a lot of attention this last eclipse cycle. And she's also very famously a Virgo sun, so that's going to get South Node eclipsed over these next few years as well. Release, letting go, redefining, taking out the trash. Some other folks who are really associated with Diddy, whose names I definitely expect to keep coming up just because of how much in their chart is getting activated, are a number of members of the Kardashian-Jenner clan. Notably, the stage mom, Kris, has Mercury and Mars in Libra, also has a Virgo rising. Kim Kardashian has so much on the Virgo Pisces axis. I was really surprised. She has a Virgo Venus, Jupiter, and midheaven that are going to get hammered by that South Node. But her moon and her IC are in Pisces. And I'm trying to not do predictions here, but if Kim Kardashian really retreated from the public eye and really went focused on her kids and that interior family unit, the private family unit, I would not be surprised if she really took a step back. And I would be remiss if I did not say that our natal charts continue to get transited even after death, right? So we see this with recurring interest in certain public figures, someone who maybe who has passed, who is no longer with us, who is having a Saturn return still. That might coincide with a new biography or a new biopic coming out about them, that kind of thing. And eclipse cycles can really bring folks who have passed back into the spotlight, especially when they tie into a major news story or industry that is getting lit up by a particular eclipse season. And so the Virgo Pisces eclipse cycle that we're going to see here over the next few years is going to, do I want to say it's going to? I would 95% sure put my hat on that it's going to involve the legacies of Whitney Houston, who has so much Libra and Virgo, Tupac Shakur, who is either an Aries or a Pisces moon. We don't have a confirmed birth time for him. And Aaliyah, who had her moon and Saturn in Virgo. And I would also anticipate some new things coming up around Michael Jackson, who had a Virgo sun and Pisces moon, purportedly a Pisces rising. These were all untimely, tragic deaths that still have a lot of mystery around them. The circumstances, who was at fault, those are things that haven't really been resolved. There's a lot of questions also with some of those folks as to whether the people who took the fall for a particular celebrity's passing, maybe allegedly, according to some, are not the ones who actually did the deed, right? So This is the kind of thing that eclipse cycles can be really useful for looking at. When we have a lot of major news stories, a lot of events cropping up around similar themes, similar industries all at once, we can see whose chart is getting lit up as a way to, this isn't perfect, but it does kind of help us assess who is more and less central to the stories that are currently happening. Listen, y'all, I had every intention of this being a short and concise episode, but I do hope here at the end that eclipses make even a slight bit more sense to you. Feel free to get in the comments, ask me questions, whether on YouTube or on Instagram. Like, let's keep talking it out. Do you have thoughts on the Diddy folks being involved in this eclipse cycle? What other news stories are you noticing that are coming up right now? I'd love to hear what you all think in terms of how eclipses impact not only people individually, but also collectively. I do also have to give a super special shout out and thank you to Jamila from the Astrology for Writers Discord for saving my ass and sending me a PDF of the Demetra George chapter, since my copy was back in New York and I'm currently recording while teaching in Iowa. Thank you, Jamila. Appreciate you. And thank you, The Coven, for listening. Make sure you're subscribed so that you get weekly episode drops. And listen, if eclipses also confuse your fellow astrology curious friends, send them this episode. Sharing is caring. I'll see you later this month for a special episode I'm doing with Coven numerologist Bee Scolnick about the presidential election here in the United States. Deep breaths. Talk soon. Love y'all. Bye.